If there's one team that has been clowned a ton the last few years, it has been Penn State. Ever since the scandal that rocked the college football world, Penn State has just not been able to get over the hump. While they did win a Big Ten championship back a couple years ago, they have just not been able to make the playoff, have not been able to win those huge games, and every single year they're one of those teams that's hyped up and always disappoints. Last year, in my opinion, was the epitome of that, as they beat the 10 easiest teams on their schedule and lost to the 2 hardest. They just couldn't quite get over the hump, which is why James Franklin went out and got 2 of the better coordinator hires he could have possibly made. The first one was grabbing Tom Allen, who was a longtime head coach at Indiana, who had done a really good job with the defense and at one point had actually helped Indiana football get to the top of the world. But he fell apart really quickly and ended up as a coordinator. That happened because he lost Manny Diaz to the Duke head coaching job. On the offensive side of the ball, they went out and got Andy Kotelnicki. He is a new offensive wizard from Kansas, as he helped turn around that Jayhawks program, helped find Jalen Daniels, and already has shown major strides in fixing this Penn State team. This past weekend they played against West Virginia, and for the first time in a long time in my eyes, Penn State football actually looks quite scary. They have a good quarterback in Drew Allar, who looks like he's only going to get better. They are loaded at the running back position, have found their next great wide receiver, and their defense looked as good, if not better, than last season. In today's video, I want to talk about Penn State football. We're going to go through why this team I think is much scarier and why they are more of a threat than I initially thought. But before we get started, if you're a big fan of college football, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I can cover next. Now let's get started and talk about Penn State football. So last season, Penn State had a similar amount of hype. Everyone was expecting Drew Allar to take the next step after being a backup to Sean Clifford, and both Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton were back and supposed to be better than ever. They also got a couple of good receivers out of the portal like Dante Cephas, but unfortunately things just never quite materialized the way we expected. While they did beat West Virginia in week 1 at home, it was a little bit closer than the experts predicted. From there they beat Delaware and Illinois before destroying number 24 Iowa 31-0 in the whiteout game. Honestly, none of those first 4 games were that much of a challenge for them. They then would easily beat Northwestern and UMass before the game that everyone had circled. This was on the road against number 3 Ohio State, and people were concerned that Drew Allar was not ready for the moment, and he wasn't. They ended up losing to Ohio State 20-12, but the score felt a lot worse than that. After that, they'd go back and beat Indiana after being down in the 3rd quarter, and then would destroy Maryland. Yes, they did lose to Ohio State, but they could get revenge, but they were now going back home to play against number 3 Michigan, and everyone would forget about that loss if they could just beat the Wolverines. It was a similar game to the Ohio State game, as Allar couldn't really get anything going, and he looked very nervous. They ended up losing 24-15, and they had now lost to the 2 big marquee teams on their schedule. After that, they'd close out the year with victories over both Rutgers and Michigan State, and they went 10-2 with a 7-2 mark in the Big Ten. Honestly, no one really cared though, because everyone was upset about losing to Michigan and Ohio State. They would end up playing in the Peach Bowl, where they would lose to Ole Miss, and they actually lost to the 3 best teams on their schedule. That was kind of what Penn State had become, and fans were low-key starting to get very frustrated. In total, Drew Allar ended up passing for 2,631 yards with 25 touchdowns and 2 picks. Solid numbers, but again, he didn't elevate his play against the best of the best, which is what he was brought in to do. Both Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton were tremendous on the ground as they combined for nearly 1,700 yards. Keandre Lambert-Smith became the top receiver on the team, and both Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren had 7 touchdowns apiece at the tight end spot. Theo would go off to the NFL, and Lambert-Smith would go into the portal. They also ended up losing guys like Adisa Isaac and Chop Robinson to the NFL draft, so some were wondering how the defense would respond in 2024. Well, as I said earlier in the video, Penn State completely rebranded going into this season. They got rid of their old offensive coordinator and brought in a guy by the name of Andy Kotelnicki. He is seen as a phenom in the coaching world, as he turned around one of the worst programs in college football history, Kansas, into a really solid offensive team. He's one of those coaches that loves to air it out, and he uses a lot of motion and confusion to get defenses off balance. He was going to bring that style of system to Penn State, and James Franklin knew that he was taking a risk. Yes, it worked at Kansas, but would that work at Penn State, and would that system work against the best of the best? That was to be determined. On the defensive side of the ball, they got one of the better defensive coordinators in the country in Tom Allen, who was the former head man at Indiana. His defenses were always solid in Bloomington, but the offense and recruiting was where he was hurting, and Tom Allen ultimately got run out of town after 3 straight bad seasons in 2021, 2022, and 2023. He had that one bright spot in 2019 and 2020. Ultimately, Penn State was rebranding at the coordinator spots, and now they had the pieces to hopefully develop, and if not, they got some guys to plug into the mix. Drew Allar was obviously back, and he was seen as a 5-star recruit and the #1 quarterback in his class by some sites, so he was expected to step up and maybe take that next leap into becoming both an NFL quarterback and a dark horse Heisman contender. Still though, some were concerned that he was just like Christian Hackenberg and he would not pan out. In terms of the running back spot, they once again brought back both Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, as they are the two best junior running backs in the entire country in my eyes. In the receiving spot, yes, they lost Lambert Smith, but they returned Tyler Warren at tight end, and people were raving about Omari Evans and their new transfer, Julian Fleming. While Fleming didn't get a chance to do a whole lot in week 1, Harrison Wallace did. He was talked about all summer long as the next great Penn State receiver, hopefully following in the footsteps of guys like Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin, and most recently Jahan Dotson. Harrison Wallace proved it in week 1, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Expectations have been ridiculously high for Penn State, and while there was always a potential for them to look scary, they always seem to have a mask with a little child's face under it instead of actually having a monster behind it. That was kind of a dumb reference, but that's how Penn State comes across to me. Maybe a better way of saying it is all bark but no bite. In week 1, they'd end up playing against West Virginia, and West Virginia had a surging end to the 2023 season. They're one of the best ground teams in the country, and Garrett Green was a tough gunslinger who wanted to win, and they also had a rowdy home crowd, and they were singing country roads. Unfortunately for them, they were barely able to really get going. After a slow start to the game in which neither team scored in the first quarter, Harrison Wallace eventually had a 50-yard touchdown pass from Drew Allar, and then they failed the 2-point conversion. This was the first moment where Penn State looked a lot different and a lot more explosive. After that, Katron Allen would have a 20-yard touchdown from Allar, and then things would get weird. After 2 West Virginia field goals, Omari Evans had a crazy catch, which led to an eventual Harrison Wallace touchdown right before half, and they took a 20-6 lead. Sadly, there was a weather delay, so they had to stop play for quite some time, but eventually in the third quarter, Nick Singleton then showed that the running game was going to be better as he had a 40-yard touchdown, and that brought the lead up to 27-6. West Virginia's star running back CJ Donaldson did have a 1-yard touchdown run in the fourth quarter, but eventually the game was sold by a Tyler Warren 19-yard pass, and West Virginia ended up losing 34-12, and this was huge for Penn State. All offseason we heard about the potential changes coming to the Nittany Lions offense, and the system was kind of kept under wraps in both the spring and summer, with the only live scrimmage action being witnessed by the media, and they had a super vanilla blue and white game. We heard about Kotelnicki and what he was going to try to do at Penn State, and we finally got to see it unleashed, and honestly it worked. There was a ton on the line at Morgantown, as if there was a dud performance, that would have ended months of goodwill that Kotelnicki had built amongst fans, and many would have been really worried about the 2024 season. Instead, after that quiet first quarter though, the offense exploded, Drew Allar got confident, and both the running and passing game got pretty crazy. The number 8 ranked Nittany Lions kicked off week 1 with a bang, as Allar finished with 216 yards and 3 touchdowns, Nick Singleton had 114 yards and a touchdown, and Harrison Wallace was an absolute star receiver, showing he is next up, as he ended up having 5 catches for 117 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tyler Warren was also solid, and it looks like Penn State honestly passed the eye test. They survived this 2-game series with the Mountaineers and have now won their 4th straight consecutive season opener. This win felt a lot different than last year's at home against the Mountaineers, as West Virginia did everything they could to get Penn State rattled, and they honestly had a better team and were in a much better position, but it didn't work and Penn State controlled that game. You're probably saying, Scott, I've seen this movie before. Well, last year Penn State ranked 97th nationally, which is 47 plays of 20+ yards. Against West Virginia, they already had 11 of those in just one game, and they were much more willing to push the ball downfield. One player in particular is Nick Singleton, as he had 2 40-yard runs. His longest run last season was just a measly 24 yards. In my opinion, there was one drive that really showed why this Penn State team is different, and that was right before half. Kotelnicki had that deep shot from Allar to Omari Evans, who hauled in that 55-yard catch. Honestly, it was offensive pass interference, but they got away with it. Nevertheless, they were in field goal range, and then with 10 seconds left, instead of just trying to run it or settling for a field goal, Allar threw it to the end zone, and they had an 18-yard touchdown to Harrison Wallace. I don't think Penn State would have done that the last couple of years. They probably would have just ran it a couple times and not even have tried to have that deep shot or tried to score that touchdown. Kotelnicki, though, wants to win, and Allar said, quote, "That was a huge part of the game, and it shows Coach K's aggressiveness as a play caller." Also, Penn State was a lot more creative. Kotelnicki was advertised as a creative mind, and he showed a lot of that against West Virginia. We saw a 350-pound lineman motion as a wide receiver, and there was also a couple of extra times where guys were just running around or in very odd formations. One of the Nittany Lions' best plays was when backup quarterback Beau Pribula faked a pop pass to Katron Allen and then threw it to a wide open Tyler Warren for that 19-yard score. The only issue in my eyes was that they were a little bit one-dimensional on who got the ball. 8 different receivers saw offensive snaps, but only 2 were actually targeted. Surprisingly, Julian Fleming was not targeted once, and it looks like Wallace and Omari Evans are the guys, but that's going to need to change a little bit. In terms of the defense, Penn State's new defense absolutely impressed. There are a lot less question marks on this side of the ball for the Nittany Lions, even with Tom Allen, as this unit had proven commodities everywhere. Penn State's biggest question mark was the corner position, in which they'd have to replace 3 starters, but Jalen Kimber and AJ Harris both looked really solid, and then Jalen Reed looked great in the team's new line position. Kevin Winston Jr. and Zakie Wheatley also played great at safeties, and having 3 safeties on the field at once proved to be a huge boost for Penn State in both the pass and run defense. The secondary held quarterback Garrett Green to just 161 yards passing and contested passes all day long. As I said earlier in the video, West Virginia had a 3-headed monster at running back, and they were one of the best rushing teams last year, but Penn State shut them down to just 80 total yards and 2.6 yards per carry. Last year, Garrett Green ran for 71, and this year he just had 5. Penn State's defense seems like it has not missed a beat since last year, and if the offense can make improvements, the Nittany Lions could be scary. Abdul Carter is one of my favorite players on defense, and it seemed he was a little bit slow, so if he can figure it out, they can be even better. So yeah, in general, the offense is more explosive, they're taking more chances, and the defense is super impressive, but ultimately the reason that Penn State's more scary is because the star power looks a lot different. Allar is a truly different player in Kotelnicki's offense, as he's now looking downfield and now playing a lot more aggressive, and that just did not happen last year. He was 5 of 7 on passes that covered more than 15 yards, and he looked decent running out of the pocket. He had that great stiff arm on Josiah Trotter, and also showed a level of confidence and emotion we just never saw from him in 2023. Maybe it's an extra year in the system, maybe it's an extra year of maturity, but ultimately I think it is the change in system. He's a confident player. Penn State desperately needed a wide receiver 1, as Keandre Lambert-Smith was alright, but now they found their guy in Harrison Wallace. My main concern though is that he was targeted a ton in that game, and they will need to spread the ball a little bit more, but in general, now having a couple of guys who can actually make plays, especially one go-to player, is huge, and that's not something they had last year. Former Penn State offensive coordinator Mike Yurcich had no idea how to use Nick Singleton, as in this game he had a total of 183 yards, and last season when Mike Yurcich was the OC, Singleton had 0 100 rush yard games. In the 4 games since then, he's had 2 100-yard efforts, and it looks like the new system is really helping him out. Finally, on the offensive line, Penn State did really good, and they only had 4 negative rushing yards, and neither Allar or Pribula were ever sacked. So yeah, to go through a checklist, Penn State has a good offensive line, 2 really experienced coordinators, a fun offense, a confident quarterback, a new receiver, a 1-2 punch at running back, a really stout defense, and now a lot of confidence. Penn State, in my opinion, should be able to cruise through the rest of the season, and I do think they're going to make the playoff this year. I don't know how far I picked them to go, but this Penn State team does look different, and James Franklin I think honestly knew this was his last chance, and he had to make it work, and I think he did. But what do you guys think? If you're a Penn State fan, what do you think down below? Is this team fake? Are they fraudulent? Or are they actually good? Also, be sure to let me know another video or topic I can cover next. Don't forget to leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.